Good day, everybody. Welcome again to another installment of our Mixing for House of Worship sessions. My name's Chip Allen. I'm the training manager for Yamaha Pro Audio here in the North America. And with me, I brought my two friends along again. Joining me, we now have, I think I've got everybody there. Yeah, Ron and Harold, they're back. I didn't have to force them either. It was actually pretty cool. They were like, yeah, we'll do it again. Sure. And today, well, first of all, I should admit something. I was thinking about jumping right into some other segments, like talking about dynamics and EQ and effects. But these guys brought up a good point. It's like, well, maybe before we go into that, maybe we should have a discussion on signal flow. And so, and at first we were thinking, well, maybe we could do that and dynamics in one day. But I figured let's keep it separate. That way we give you guys more time for Q&A and we don't keep you on as long as we did the first one, although it was an awesome experience. And as you can tell, we all have a very passionate view when it comes to our ministries for House of Worship and specifically in the audio domain. So a couple of things I should mention is we will be having a poll. I finally got the link working. And so you'll see that link. You'll see it in the Q&A and we'll post it again from time to time if the Q&A fills up a little bit. We'll post it every 15 minutes or so, but feel free to click on that link and fill out the short poll. We basically want to know what you guys want from us, what you're looking to hear more from. It's hard to guess. We don't know how many people we have on here at any given time, and we don't know where your knowledge levels are. So we want to make sure that we cater to your needs and aren't just talking about a bunch of stuff you don't want us to talk about. Also with me in the background, you can't see them, but are my compatriots at Yamaha, Jose Perez and Ryan Augustine. I notice some of you are Spanish-speaking viewers, and that's fine because Jose is very fluent in Spanish, and actually so is Harold. I did not know that.
Que vengan las preguntas, hermanos, por favor, que vengan las preguntas.
Now, don't start that, because then I won't know. Me and Ron won't know anything other than the usual.
En cualquier momento podemos hablar de Chip o de Ron y no saben lo que estamos diciendo. Así que vengan las preguntas, hermanos, por favor.
So if you feel better asking Q&A in Spanish, go ahead and Jose can reply to you back in Spanish. But Jose, I'm going to ask that if, obviously, for those of us that don't speak Spanish, that maybe you want to keep the answer in English or post the question in English so that...
I'll do it both ways.
Okay, see, there's Jose. And Ryan Augustine, who's also with us, joining us, he's one of our TMG specialists. He's actually fluent in Spanish, too. I don't know if he's as good in Spanish as Jose is, but I'm fortunate enough to have these two guys to back me up. All right. Enough talk. Now, before we get going, I just want to make you aware, you can see on the screen that we have 3 more sessions scheduled after this. And how deep you want to go will base upon the polls. And then we'll also have our own input as well. But May 22nd, we'll be exploring dynamics. The 29th, we'll talk about EQ. And the 5th, we'll be talking about effects. So basically the next 3 Fridays, and it'll be the same time for each of those sessions, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 Central. All right. Harold, Ron, anything from last time that if you have anything to say, just because I talk so much?
Well, as always, I have to commend you for your work on the graphics because you're just awesome at that. And I so appreciate all the work that you and Jose and everybody on the whole Yamaha team put into this and educating I would say the big takeaway from last week is and it's probably a point that you can't drive home enough, that these skills, these techniques, these things that we're showing you and explaining to you are as applicable on a Ravage console, top of the line, flagship, fully loaded, all the bells and whistles, and yet still very applicable to, MG consoles, or before that, analog world, like the same things, whether we're talking about the signal flow, whether we're talking about gain or EQ, or so as we continue the series, all this, those same skill sets will apply at whatever level you're at, and so in Yamaha's vast inventory of consoles and legacy of consoles, and at every price point and at every skill level, those same skills would apply from the 2-3 knob per strip all the way down to a fully loaded channel strip, so yeah.
Yep.
Ron?
Same thing. Thank you guys and Chip for putting this together, and it's been a blast so far, and I can't wait for the rest of it.
Yeah, you guys are good. And I had to admit, these first two, these guys have kind of been like, oh, we want to talk about all this other cool stuff. And so that's where the dynamics and the EQ and the effects, that's where these guys are really going to give you some secrets, and maybe, I don't know. I don't know if I didn't ask them about that, but this is where they're going to really, and hopefully if my end works out well, we'll have some audio examples. And it won't be, I know going through these webinars, audio is not the greatest, so we'll try to find some very drastic examples just so that you can understand what we're talking about. Hopefully we'll make that happen. So, all right, without further ado, let's get into this. So, I think most of us remember, I'm going to go full screen with this. Remember what this is, this beloved analog mixer. And the whole point of this session is to talk about how audio travels through the mixer, why it travels in the way that it does, and how you can best utilize those tidbits of knowledge. So our beloved analog mixer here, everybody's seen one or two in their lifetime. And basically what you're looking at, the way analog mixers are designed, it kind of emulates, the layout is basically indicative of how the audio travels through the mixer. So if you start from the top, where your input would be, and you would travel through your gain and your EQ and whatever else is there. And if we come do one more and actually lay it out, you'll see from your mic input, the audio basically travels in a linear fashion here. So going from your input, whether it's a mic or a line input, to your gain adjustment. And this particular mixer for the channels have a compressor built in, so it hits that next, and then followed by the EQ and your aux sends and your left right pan and your mute and your fader and subgroup assignments. So this is typical of most, if not all, mixers. Now, some of you may have actually looked in the manual. Some of you may have not. Some of you have even looked in the back of a manual. And this is usually where you will find this block diagram. And I bring this up because when we talk about signal flow, this is actually the electrical engineering way of showing that signal flow. And so I just want to touch on it a little bit to help you understand exactly what you are looking at. So let's blow this up a little bit. Originally we used to say, do you wish you had a map? But nobody uses a map anymore, right? It's all GPS. We were talking about this yesterday. Remember, for those of us that are old enough, when you had to go to AAA and get the triptych for your trip, and Yeah, I don't even know if they make them anymore. But um, so here's what you're looking at blown up, and this is indicative of a single channel. And so, would you like someone to draw it out on paper? Well, you can kind of do that yourself, right? So what you're looking at here is coming from the mic input, passing through all the components in the mixer to the stereo left, right, out. And so all this diagram shows you is the capabilities of the said mixer, what it can do, what it can route to. So anytime you have a question and you're just curious, well, I wonder if my mixer can do this, I wonder if my mixer can do that, you can look at the block diagram and trace it through and figure it out. Now, having said that, you will even on digital consoles, there is a virtual block diagram, meaning that, okay, even though it's all DSP and code, there is still a diagram that is created just like this, even for digital consoles, to explain the audio path. So when you're looking at this diagram, the other thing is just to understand what you're looking at. So I've kind of highlighted some things here. So your microphone input is going to be illustrated, and the path for the mic, if you go into that input, is illustrated by its color. Then if we look at a line level, in this case, in this mixer, it's a separate input. And so you can see the path, and then it joins the same path as the mic level once you get past the mic pre. And then you have an insert, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the insert and understanding what it does. But basically, it's just it interrupts the audio path to allow you to redirect. It's kind of like a detour almost, right? And it allows you to redirect audio out of the mixer to an external device and then bring it back in at the same position in the audio path. And analog mixers, these insert points are usually fixed. In other words, they can only appear at one part in the audio path. But we'll talk more about that because the insert is really what gives the power for the digital mixers as we know them. So you've seen what the analog mixer looks like. So here's some examples of the GUIs, the displays of digital mixers. Now, whether you're a Yamaha user or other manufacturer, they all have a GUI to represent what the console can do. And typically, these GUIs are set up to replicate what an analog mixer looks like. So don't be afraid when you're looking at these to be overwhelmed as you're looking at this. This gives you the ability to understand the signal flow as well. And below the three windows, you also see that even though we have touch screens nowadays, we still give you knobs. Most mixers, most digital consoles will give you knobs as well, either to enhance what's in the window or in place of. So this just depends on the design of the console, how many knobs and what those knobs are designed to do. And a lot of the times those knobs can serve as multiple purpose. So you just have to consider each model separately. So if we break it down a little more, and we're looking at multi-channel overviews, again, if we looked at multiple channels on an analog board, that's how it looks. And then we look at the GUI of a digital console, pretty much looks identical. You start at the top with your input gain stage, all the way through your processors, your EQs, your processors, panning, sends, all of that. And they pretty much follow the same path as they would on an analog mixer. So don't freak out and think it's a lot harder than what it is. And so if we break it down even more to a selected channel view, now here's where digital boards give you a bit more flexibility, because obviously on an analog board, whether you're looking at 8 channels or 1 channel, the setup is always the same. Stuff can't be moved around. But on a digital console, you can look at things differently. And again, it just depends on the console, the model. The TF, which you see to the far left of the 3 digital screens here, still maintains a channel strip view when you're looking at a selected channel, but then it does expand, and I'll show that later to give you a more individual view of each section. And then you look at the CL and QL screen in the middle and the Rivage screen on the far right. Those break out to show you all the components in that channel and all the parameters you have access to. And so this just makes it a little easier for you to navigate within a console. And again, when it comes to knobs, we give you tons of knobs. So, and sometimes we don't. The TF, for example, relies a lot on the touch screen, so your amount of knobs are minimal. Whereas Rivage, we know some people prefer knobs over touch screens and vice versa, so we give you the ability to do either and give you a full complement of parameters available either way. And then the CL kind of splits the difference here. We give you a lot of the popular knobs, but then, you know, there's some other things that you'll want to go into the screen to utilize as well. All right, now we've talked about gains, the different interfacing that we do. And so I just want to show you how signal flow applies to digital consoles. So what you're looking at here is on the left-hand side, again, is a diagram of a analog board, but digital boards, they'll also have these block diagrams in the manual, but we also provide you with a visual within the console itself. So you're seeing the CL and QL console screen on the top, where it shows you the audio path, and then at the bottom screen, you're looking at the Rivage and its audio path. And so basically going from left to right, that is your signal flow for audio. Now, before we go any heavier into these two screens, we need to talk about a couple of things. And one of those is the what we call gain levels or gain stages. And Harold was awesome enough to offer up a video he had done. How long ago did you do this, Harold?
It's a few weeks ago. It was for something else that never got used, and so I was like, man, this applies right now, so let me see if it works.
So to keep us from talking way too long, we're going to show this video, and then we'll do some more discussion. And I think everybody will be able to hear the audio except for my two panelists because of the way we have to connect. They won't hear it, but they know what's in it, so no problem there. And
okay. And before you play that, let me
yes.
preface this. So so as you can see there with the on the this, like when you look at all the channel strips or you look at all the different selected channels on all the different on all the different consoles, and this is true for any console, so it's not just Yamaha consoles, but they all have the same components. They are going to have a gain. You know, signal flow is going to be signal flow and all the way down through. Some have more features, some have less features, but it's all the same. And so, but they all start at the entry level, at the gain. And so right there at the very top, you have, you know, they're all, no matter what it looks like, they're all going to have some level of a gain adjustment. And so this video kind of sets that up, that how important it is to get this right, and starting there before you worry about anything else on the channel strip, and how that's kind of sets you up to win right from the beginning. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Just a little preface before the video.
Fair enough. And we'll roll the beautiful being footage. All right. Jose, let me know if you don't hear audio.
Hey guys, I'm Harold Rubens, and wanted to take a few minutes here to show you some, give you little examples about gain structure. So I brought the console out here, and I wanted to show you, just kind of set some things up for you to see what good gain structure, how it can help you, bad gain structure, how it can hurt you. And we're not even going to get into the sonics, right? How things sound when you don't have good gain structure and the problems that come with that. But I just visually very elementary how good gain structure can help you and or it can hurt you. So I'm just going to do something real easy here. I'm just going to use the oscillator in the console. If you don't know what that is, it's an internal signal generator the console has. Most of your consoles have it. So on this one, I'm just going to turn it on. What I'm actually doing is routing it back to all these inputs, okay? And I've got to have all these channels labeled here. So I got, you know, a standard band. I got a drum set. Here's a 4-piece drum kit. I have a bass guitar, electric guitar. I got 2 acoustics, and I got a background vocalist and a lead vocal. Just made up, okay? But very real and very can be easily replicated on any standard band, okay? So I'm going to route this. I'm going to turn on oscillator, and let's say all these inputs, just like it would in real life, everything comes out at you at different levels. The kick drum's going to come out at different levels than the snare and the hi-hat and the toms and bass guitars and the whatever, right? And everything comes out, and people sing at different levels, so everything's going to come out at you at different levels. Okay, so we're going to start with the gain knob, right? In this console, this is the gain knob. I have this assigned as the gain knob, okay? But let's say that you don't adjust gain. And this is your levels that are coming in, right? Okay, obviously you can see levels are all over the place here. And I want to send signals over to the PA. So let's say they're going out to the stereo, right? I'm gonna start bringing these up one by one until they get to the same level over here on the master, right? And then I'm gonna show you what happens. So let's just start here. Here's the kick, okay, right there. You can see that all the inputs are going to end up right here, right around that first orange light, somewhere in there where it's tapping that. So that's about the -18 level. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. Let's go to the snare. Okay, snare. Let's get there. Maybe close. Okay, let's get to the bottom snare. Okay, about right there. Okay, let's get to the hi-hat. All right, we're going to do this all the way down all the inputs, and we're just going to try to get to as even as possible. All right, I got all the levels there. All right, so let's look at this here. So as you can see, all my faders right over here, you can see that they're all over the place. How the fader is barely up and the snares are way up. Look at this lead vocals way up and this background vocals down here, and they're just all over the place. However, when I sent signal to stereo, they were all equal. They're all showing up equal. So if I were to turn them all on as if I was, you know, mixing a mix or mixing a show here, you can see right over here that they're all pretty much hitting, you know, hey, look, I'm well within right there. That's actually pretty good levels right there that I'm hitting, right? Okay. Now, but look at this. Look what my faders are doing. I mean, I have no representation of actually what my mix is sounding like. I mean, just right here, here's my lead vocal cranked all the way up, and here's my BGV way down now. Chances are, by how much level is coming in, that this is actually louder than my lead vocal, right? Just how much level is coming in, right? I have no visual representation of my faders. They're all over the place of what my mix is sounding like, right? Now, technically, we saw that as I built this, you saw it happening, that we were balanced, right? It's a balanced mix, not necessarily it was a great mix, but it was balanced. All inputs were going to the stereo bus equally, all right? So you can see this is probably a disaster right here, okay? I mean, look at this mix, okay? But, however, my levels are good, okay? Now, let me rebuild this with a good gain structure, okay? Now, well, let me just do that, and I'll show you this. So now I'm just going to go through all my inputs right here, and I'm just going to adjust gain as I go through. I'm going to bring this one down, try to get to that first, barely tap in that first orange light right in there. Yeah, right in there. Okay. And I'm going to do this all the way down, all these inputs here. All right. You can see them all right here, barely doing the same thing. Everything's coming in. So now let's say my kicks were coming in and I'm adjusting the gain. So now I got it up to there. My snare was coming in, I adjusted it, okay. And they're all over, the gains knobs are all over the place, but however, my input meters are fairly all coming up in the same place. So now as I start building this mix, right, so I'm gonna start bringing it up there. As you can see kind of where that's hitting, okay. I'm gonna put these back up here. You see kind of where that's hitting, okay. I'm gonna bring the next one up. You see where that's hitting over there. And as you can see, as I start bringing my faders up to 0, that they're all hitting at the right spot right over there. Okay. So now when I go to build my mix, right, and I start building, okay, and I start bringing up my drums, and I'm building this thing, and I can start kind of going, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good mix right there. There's my drums. There's I'm kind of giving from experience kind of how I would mix things, right? And I'm looking at this, and I'm going, man, that sounds good. My vocals on top right there. I got my kick bumping right there. Yep, strong snare. Got bass going up. I'm going to keep my guitars right there, a little bit down right there. But this is kind of how I'm mixing this thing. Now, when I look at over here, I'm looking at my stereo meter. Now, that's a nominal right there, kind of where I'm hitting. It's a good gain right there. Look at where everything's coming in, where my faders are, and where my output meters are. And now look at the faders here. Look at my mix. It's actually, they're at a place where they actually represent what I'm hearing. So as I'm looking at my vocal here, it's sitting on top, and the vocal's probably out there on top, and I'm looking at all these other inputs, right? And so now I have a visual representation of kind of what I'm hearing, right? So I can easily walk up to the mix and tell you what the inputs that are loudest, right, and the ones that I'm bringing down. And this also gives me a great confidence in that, knowing that when I have this fader down and I adjusted it, that I know when I turn that channel on and I bring it up to 0, that I know where it's going to be in the house. Like, I just know volume wise how it's going to come. It's not, I don't have to figure out, oh, is it going to be too loud, it's going to be too soft. I know where that's going to be in the ears. I know where that's going to be in the wedges, or my sense, my record feeds or effects, or wherever else, how you're sending to what you're using your buses for, your mix buses. But doing it the other way, when I didn't have gain set up properly, my faders are all over the place. Therefore, everything I'm sending from those channels, it's going to be all over the place. So all my sends for monitors, all of a sudden you're going to have to say, man, the acoustic guitar is killing me. And then you're looking at acoustic guitar and your fader's probably way down because, the gain was just cranked. So now you're trying to figure out, man, he keeps saying that it's so loud, but the fader's probably up. Well, yeah, but you got a lot of input gain going on right here. And so nothing makes sense. Now when I get it right, and then I'll bring that up, man, it makes sense in the house speed, it makes sense in the ears, it makes sense in the wedges, it makes sense in how you're sending to your effects. Everything starts working. There's a synergy that really, as you're bringing it in at a good level, you're using your faders to mix, you're sending your auxiliary sends out, all has great gain structure, and then your outputs are all going to be in a good place. All right, I hope that helps. That's a quick little few minutes of showing you how gain structure works.
All righty. So, anything to add to that, Harold?
Nope. I left it all on the table, man.
So,
I would just say that it's always been my practice as I developed over the years mixing, that when I get gain structure right, I've said it time and time again, 80% of your mix, maybe it depends on what you're doing, but I would, as a general thing, about 80% of your mix, or a big chunk of your mix, is there. The rest is now EQ and flavoring, dynamics, controlling things, shaping things, putting them in place, getting out of the way of something. But, you have a great palette to work off of right there when you get gain structure correctly.
Right. So, Ron,
yeah,
give us a horror story
of improper gain structure.
Yes, sir.
Gosh,
I know I'm pulling this out on the spot, but
yeah, not that maybe I'll rephrase it as better horror scenarios.
Yeah, no names.
But yeah, it's when your gain structure is not set up properly. Not only does it affect your mix, obviously, but the whole chain. If you're mixing monitors from that desk, so you're used to, like he needed the bass guitar at this level, so then when he wants the electric guitar up, it's going to be at the same level. And if your gains are like totally jacked, like his example, you've just destroyed the guitar player. So it's just, and then I guess the only thing I'd add too, I mean, it gets a little deeper, but just understanding that faders aren't linear. Like around unity on the fader, you have much more control, much more, you know, you can move the fader for a 1 dB move a lot more than at the bottom. That same move is going to be 15 dB.
Right.
And so, I mean, in a lot of cases, like your walk-in music channel can, you know, it's just another area that I'll push up walk-in music and, oh my gosh, you know, like it's just, yeah.
So let me ask you guys this, and then we'll move on. There's a couple things I'm going to bring up here. One is, how do you guys handle keyboard players who don't balance their patches?
Slap them upside the head. No, I literally, I mean, so here's one of the things when you I think in scenarios, now obviously when you're in survival mode, when it's just coming at you, you just have to survive, right? Like, but I think when you're able to, and it's happened time and time again, and I know that, you know, hey, first of all, if you've already done enough that you have a good rapport with the players on stage, right? Like there's a mutual trust there, and you say, hey, I want to show you, when you play those brass sounds, those really plucky, whatever, you know, sound, those are really sharp sounding. They're turned up, and man, that's going to be very different than your pad sound. So as you're switching, you know, you got to go to the chorus, and you've got to balance your sounds, because, you know, if he's telling you, I mean, it's very evident that if from the same keyboard, he's telling you, okay, can you turn it up? Can you turn it down? Can you turn it up? Can you turn it down? That I'm not back there changing levels.
Right.
So now, and that's a good question, Chip, because gain structure, right? He's got a responsibility as a player as well. Now, I can only do so much at my desk with what I'm giving, right? Like I'm responsible for what comes at me. And I have all these tools, gain knobs or whatever, faders to work with, to control and to do something with what I have in front of me. If the levels are changing, right, before it get to you, then you know, it's happened many times. Now, I know when I set my desk up and I'm mixing and I see my levels, and we get it all down and we're going, then we get to a new song where they throw up a new patch and everybody's like, oh man, turn the click up and down or this. And I'm like going, chances are, because I know where my gain structure is and I know where my settings are and I know that I didn't change anything, that if things start changing, then the source is changing. And so when you're again, and that's a good example, that like all of a sudden, let's say that the guitar player turned on another extra distortion pedal or whatever it might be, and his gain went up. Now everybody that had guitar dialed in to their ear mixes or the wedges, that level just went up. Or let me give you a real world example that everybody I know deals with. How about the singer that sound checks, like, hey, check 1 2, check 1 2. Okay, can you give me some level? I need to dial. Sure. Check 1 2, check. Microphone's way down here. Check 1 2, check 1 2. You know, and they're like, all right, here we go. Let's hit the first song. They're like, ugh! And you're like, man. And all of a sudden you just blew everybody out. Now you didn't. There's no way. And so what happened at that point? You had your gain structure based on this level right here, and you got it dialed in and everything's good. But now that source changed. So that's very important, you know, especially as you're dealing with the vocals. It's a very dynamic instrument, right? So like, and you got it's a very relational thing to instruct a singer sometimes to say, because, you know, there's stuff going on in their world and they come in and they go, man, I don't want to blow my voice out, so I don't want to sing too much before I perform. You're like, great, you know, like, you know, so there's ways to do it, but that's a real world example, especially sometimes when you get into inexperienced singers where they don't really know mic positioning or this, that, or how to do it. And if the source changes, that's beyond your control. That's enough, but it's still in the conversation of gain structure.
So the whole thing is communication, right? Us as engineers, you know, a lot of times we get painted as the enemy, or, the antagonist, or it becomes more confrontational. And I try to at my church, I try to engage the musicians and the vocalists, and when they sound great, I let them know you guys sounded good. And usually that's when the accolades go back and forth, right? But deep down, they appreciate that. And also, not every musician, not every vocalist has the knowledge that you may have, like proper mic technique. Hey, keyboard player, balance your patches. I play keyboards myself and guitar, so I'm not picking on anybody because I always prided myself balancing my patches. So when I played out live, first of all, I wasn't having to grab volume knobs, right? I can just play and just hit a new patch. But one thing that I didn't know, and Ron, I'm roping you in on this one, so
yeah,
I apologize. And that is guitars. If you're not miking an amp, okay? And Ron, I kind of want you to kind of explain how important it is. And this is instrument level. So let me make this bigger here so everybody can see. So what I'm showing here, borrowed a chart off the internet to show the different source levels that you will encounter, from mic level all the way. We won't talk about speaker level, that's pretty self-explanatory, but all the way to pro level. And how when you plug these into the mixer, it's very important you do it properly. Otherwise, your gain structure, it doesn't matter what you do, it's not going to be right. And so mic level's kind of self-explanatory. You have a microphone, you plug it into the XLR jack, pretty simple. But instrument level gets a little squirrely here, because first of all, instrument level is different than line level. And most keyboards are going to be line level. Even though they're an instrument, the output's line level. And some of them may even have pro line level at +4. But most keyboards and things of that nature are going to be considered -10 output. And so these levels equate to voltage, right? So the actual source is going to emit a certain amount of voltage into the mixer, and depending on whether it's mic level or instrument level or consumer line or line level or pro line level, you will make those adjustments. Now, Ron, why is it so important if you're playing a guitar that you don't just plug a guitar directly into the line in on a mixer? Why does that not work?
Level wise, it's going to be off. And then also just the different grounding schemes and stuff, just it might not match. And then you'd end up compensating on your desk to either get the gain you need or pull the gain down, and your signal is going to be degenerated.
Right. And that's the part I really want to touch on, especially for guitars with passive pickups.
Yeah.
The pickups rely on a certain amount of loading or impedance to sound the way they were designed to sound. So if you take a guitar and you go directly into a line in on a mixer, if that line in does not handle instrument level, and if it doesn't say that it does, then it doesn't. It's looking for line level. That guitar is going to sound thin and anemic, and your guitar,
harsh.
Yeah, it's just not good. So this is where the ubiquitous direct box comes into play. And even if you're running keyboards, which are instrument level, line level. See, I'm even screwing up. If you're plugging into a snake, more than likely those snakes are all XLR. And so you could, if your mixer has and this is something we should mention now, depending on your mixer, that mic input, if it doesn't have a separate line input, is dual. It's a wide range input. In other words, it can handle mic and line level sources. from that same jack, and the gain will represent that. Also, some of these inputs may have a pad to differentiate between mic level and line level. But regardless of either mic or line, instrument level is not an option on most mixers. Now, your computer interfaces, a lot of them will have an instrument level capability, so you don't have to break out it has that compensation built in. You just push a button, or it might be even a separate jack for instrument level. But for most everything else, you're going to need a direct box, whether you're using a guitar or a keyboard, if your connection to the mixer is through the mic input. Also, other things that this gives you is the ability to control noise. This changes an unbalanced signal into a balanced signal, which can help to prevent hum and things of that nature, because we all know there's not enough EQ in the world to get rid of hum and noise. And every church has a different issue with ground. You know, it's, I don't know about you guys, but every church because I used to do system design and installation before I started working for Yamaha. And I swear every church had the most bizarre electrical grounding scheme ever. And usually it's because the original church, and then they expand upon that church with newer buildings, and they just kind of add on, and they just, well, we'll just put another ground here. And sometimes you might find 3 plugs in the same room with 3 different grounds. And that can run, and having direct boxes can help you get around that as well. But anyways, I wanted to show that. And now let's move on to the insert. So when we're talking about inserts, let's just talk about what it is actually. So let's do that. And where is
It's a world of wonder.
Well, you know, before we get into the world of digital, it's kind of good to talk about the origins, so to speak, of the mechanics of it. So let me zoom this out. So basically, the insert jack was created to allow you to, again, reroute your audio in the mixer to external devices. So basically, it would be, depending on how old you are, depending on how old the console is, it could have been 2 jacks, an insert out and an insert in, or it could have been a single jack that worked off of a tip ring sleeve plug scheme. And so basically, it would, even though, and this is not a balanced signal, so it basically takes a tip ring sleeve connector, but utilizes it in a 2-channel or a 2-direction unbalanced signal. So the tip would be your send, which would mean that the audio coming out of the insert jack going to the external, and then the ring would be the return, and then they would both share the ground. And so just give you a better example of what that looks like. I think everybody has seen this from time to time. And yes, you could even use this to take a stereo source and make it into a separate left and right. So it kind of the same cable that you would use for an insert, you could also use to do a stereo split into your left and right mono channels. But your tip ring sleeve goes into the insert jack, and then your tip again goes to the external, is your audio going to your external device. And that's, you know, people use it if they want to use another type of compressor or EQ, their favorite vintage stuff. And then the return would bring it back into that same signal path, pretty much at the same point where it left, and continues on through the mixer. So having talked about that, now let's look at our GUIs for digital. And right here. All right. So here's an example of a console you guys may be familiar with. This is basically, you'll see this screen on a CL or a QL console. Other consoles will have similar screens. Basically, this is showing you the signal flow of any particular channel. And in this case, channel 1, if you look at from left to right, after it becomes digital, and this is the digital path. So once something becomes digital, then it follows this path through the DSP, through the digital gain, high pass filter, and then your EQ and dynamics, your input channel delay, your fader, and your mute or on off button. Now, up top, you have an insert point that can be moved. So this is one of the flexible ways of handling, adding additional processing to a channel. And in this case, for the CL and QL, you could actually have 2 devices inserted in serial, but they both have to follow the same insert point. So you have a choice of 3 separate insert points here, either pre-fader, pre-dynamics in EQ, or pre-fader, post-dynamics in EQ, or post-fader, post-dynamics in EQ. And there's reasons people will utilize these for different reasons. So now I'm gonna turn it back over to my guest panelists here and kind of poke them a little bit. What do you use, one, or does it matter where you guys use it? Talk to me. What do you use? What insert position would you use and why?
Well, I think a default would probably be a pre-fader location, and the EQs depending on the console. Now on this one we have options.
Yep.
And the good thing that options, if you understand it, there is not necessarily a right way or wrong way of doing it. There's all these different options, but they all kind of do something a little bit different depending on what you're going for.
Right.
So, if I was going to use a dynamic processor, like a compressor or something, or a gate or something like that, most likely I would use that pre-fader, right? Because if it's after the fader, meaning that what after or post fader means is that it's dependent on the level of the fader, right? So if you turn your fader down, then that level drops, or if you bring your fader up, that level goes up. That would be affecting how hard or how little you're hitting the compressor or the level going into a gate, right? So probably you wouldn't want to use a dynamics processor there. Now there are reasons to do that later on. We can get into more advanced.
We'll get that next week.
Yeah, that's like a level 401, mixing 401. But for the most part, you probably, if it's a dynamics processor, you probably want it to be pre-fader, so you could have a constant level going in. You can compress that, and then you can use your fader to fit it into a mix or whatever you might want to do. EQ, if it's by itself, I don't know that it really matters. Most of the time, everything's wired pre-fader. Right. So again, it's pre-fader, you adjust it. Now, when you start dealing with something where you have combinations, right, where you have, like, say, an ability to insert 2 different things, like on this one, it kind of does matter a little bit if you put the EQ in front of the compressor or the compressor in front of the EQ. So now, one thing that we're not seeing here is that this channel strip already has an EQ built in, automatic, in these consoles. So the normal EQ for the console is before this. Am I correct, Ron? Right? So it's before the insert section. Oh, never mind. No, it depends on where.
Depends where you put it. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on where you put it. Okay. So you have the EQ of the console. Now, if you put a compressor on, let's say that your input has a lot of low end. Well, if you put a compressor before you get to EQ that, then a lot of your dynamics are going to be based on how loud all that low end is, right? But if you're able to correct that with EQ before you hit the compressor, then your compressor might react. It's going to react a little bit different. Does that make sense? So in that sense, you're kind of using the EQ to kind of correct some things before you're hitting the compressor. In other ways, you're using a compressor that's going to react to all that low end. Now, you might want that,
Right.
you know, and then the sonics of the signal are going to change. It's going to sound different because that compressor is going to be reacting to that low end. So now, if you put an EQ after that, you can get back some frequencies. You can make it sound differently after the dynamics of the signal are compressed, right? So again, there are different ways, and the abilities that this console gives you, or the consoles give you, to pick and choose makes you that much more flexible, and you can come up with different options and depending on how you want to use it. So
yeah, and then especially with corporate shows or talking heads, if you're
Yes.
using Dugan, it has to be on the post fade.
Correct.
Which then, if you want to put anything else on it, it means that insert's going to be post fade as well. But
Right.
it's all, yeah, looking at what your needs are and then making use of the resources in the best way. So
Now, question, Ron, when you do utilize, I'm glad you brought up the Dugan Automixer, because that is the way it works. Dan Dugan designed it to work that way. It has to be inserted post fader. So first of all, for all of you budding engineers out there, don't be thinking that Dugan's going to put you out of work. You're still mixing. It's just kind of that third arm coming over your head. They're like, hey, let me help you here and help you get some stuff going. Now, having said that, at least in our consoles, the Dugan is only for speech. It is not designed for singing. Now, Dan Dugan does have a music out version of the Dugan Automixer, but right now I don't. The one that we have in our console, and I don't know if we'll ever have the other algorithm, but the one in our console is only for speech. But Ron,
yes.
do you find when you're doing those corporate type of shows, talking heads type thing, do you really need much anything else?
Than the Dugan, or?
Yeah. I mean, how much more processing are you really using other than
well, see, it gets into then, but I'm also usually providing a record feed.
Okay.
And I want that to sound nice.
Okay.
And I don't want it to be super chopped up.
Okay.
And so I actually will use it in conjunction with the PSE. And then
PSC?
the primary source enhancer. Or I'm sorry.
Yes. The 50-45.
45.
50-45. We'll talk about that in the.
But so all that to say that there is, just different. I'll do it in different stages is basically what it gets down to. But I just find the Dugan very helpful, just to help manage. I'm still riding the faders. I'm still,
Yep.
All of a sudden, somebody speaking gets hoarse in a panel discussion. You have to push them up, or their mic slid down, or something. You're always having to manage it, but it helps you control, and especially if you're in any kind of a dicey situation with gain before feedback,
right.
it just makes your job easier.
One other thing, and either of you can jump in. Talk about the importance of having, so when you're dealing with a digital mixer, you have the analog gain, or the analog head amp as we call it in Yamaha speak, but then which is the analog level, but then there's this digital gain circuit right after that. So how do you guys utilize that digital gain in your normal day-to-day mixing? And
I'll say, just off the top of my head right away, most Dante inputs, I automatically turn down 6 dB. And these days, like all my playback stuff and and even, wireless mics too, they're coming in Dante, just come in almost at 0. They're really hot. So I just immediately just give myself an extra 6 dB lower, reduce 6 dB so I have more room on the console with my gain structure.
Gotcha. Harold?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about this right before we went live on this thing, but So digital game, it depends. Okay, so functional, like for example, if we're doing, if you're in a situation where you're doing maybe some shared preamps where a console might have, let's say you're in front of house for monitor situation where front of house might have control of the analog mic pre, and monitor world, they're just taking the split off of that. The digital gain will give me a level of gain control that I can have on top of whatever levels coming to me, right? So, and then we can get into gain compensation, all that, but that's another feature that the consoles have. That's one way it gives you. So just to be clear, when the signal from externally comes in from the analog world, say a microphone gets plugged into the console, it hits the analog mic pre first. Then goes through a few things, but then the next gain stage is going to be your digital. Once the signal converts, it hits your digital gain, and then you have another level. So that when we say analog or digital gain, those are the twos we're talking about. So in Ron's case, when he's talking about the Dante levels, those inputs are already digitized, they're already converted, they're coming in a digital language. And so they're skipping the analog mic pre. So the only adjustment that he's got to turn down or turn up is the digital gain on those things. For me, it might be a little bit advanced, but some of the older consoles, like the PM5D or the M7 and those things. One thing that I was doing, I wanted to get those consoles running a little hotter, a little warmer. And so what I would do, just for my taste, what I would do is I would turn down the digital trim minus 6 dB, and then it allowed me to run the analog side of the console a little bit hotter. So it's just back from the days of obviously we didn't have digital trim on the PM4000, but it's running a part of the console hotter and bringing down into the output section or vice versa to get, just to kind of affect circuitry and how it sounds. But in those consoles, like I know definitely on the 5D and the M7, I would run because I really liked the way that sounded. I would run the analog part of the console, the mic pre, hotter, and then I got my gain structure back down by turning down the digital gain on those consoles. So it's just it's great to have that second layer of control before it gets into the right before it gets in the digital world,
Right. I want to show a graphic real quick for everybody to look at. And some of you may have paid attention to this, some of you may have not. But see where the fader is highlighted in purple here. Right to the right of it, there's a Sigma clip, and there's a little virtual LED there. And what that will show if there is clipping anywhere in your signal chain for that channel. So if you see that light up, it may light up and your level may not even be peaking. But if you see that light up somewhere in your signal chain, there is some clipping going on. So it's not good. You want to pay attention to that. If you see that light lighting up, that means maybe you've done some EQ changes that have boosted certain frequencies, and then, or maybe there's something going on in your dynamics that you did. It may not show in it won't show on your input, right? Because typically when you're looking at your metering, you're just looking at what's coming in. And unless you change your metering to look at what's going out, you won't see that. But that's what that Sigma clip indicator is there for, to let you know that your signal is clipping somewhere in the signal chain. And that is something you need to address because it will affect your audio. So just wanted to go through that. All right, last one. And this is basically a view of our Rivage series of consoles. And this screen, again, is another signal flow. As a matter of fact, let me zoom in on it. This basically shows you We even have a tab and it's called signal flow. So how could I not show this window when we're doing a session on signal flow? Right. So again, audio is traveling from left to right. But the difference here is you've got more flexibility with inserts. So you can actually move these inserts in between each of those sections of the channel strip. And keep in mind that those sections in that signal path are fixed. So you can't move those, but you can move your inserts around those and pretty much give yourself all the flexibility here. And in this particular window, they also show you the actual analog gain in. So not just the digital gain. The cool thing with this is you see metering.
Yeah.
So you see metering at every component. And so if you were clipping somewhere, you would, or maybe you weren't even getting audio, maybe you had input and then somewhere the chain was broken. And this is something we should talk about with inserts. Not so much, it depends on the model, but sometimes if you have an insert turned on, especially in the analog world, if you have an insert turned on or engaged or plugged in and nothing's there to continue the circuit, you'll lose audio at that point in the signal chain. And you can sort of do that here digitally. You can make an adjustment on one of your insert effects and accidentally have turned the attenuator all the way down. I've had plenty of calls where people have called me and say, yeah, I'm not getting any audio. Then we look at the EQ section, they turn the attenuator all the way down and they don't know how they did it or how it happened. It's like raising kids, right? You know, nobody knows who did it. But
you know, Chip, I wanted to say something because, man, you bring up a really great point, and this is a good example right there with the Rivage and all the metering. But
there's the but.
No. I would say this on the other consoles. Let's say, well, you don't have a page like this, but you do have, when you pull up the EQ, there's a level thing there, and there's an attenuator. When you go to your compressor section, your dynamic section, there's an input and then there's an output, a makeup gain. You have those a gain. So all throughout, the reason I bring all throughout, there's metering in the console. It may not look like this, but there is, and the importance of that. And I'm glad you pointed out that little light there, because folks, you need to understand that, like, if EQ can be used. Not that it should be used for this, but a lot of times if you're doing a lot of boosting or if you're doing a lot of cutting or like big cuts and overall, you're essentially turning up and turning down that input. You are bringing some frequencies and bringing down some frequencies. And so essentially your volume might change a little bit. Your compressor, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to take down all these peaks, now all of a sudden got softer. So you use gain to make it up. If you don't know what you're doing or if you're not watching these meters, the idea of the makeup gain is like, hey, I've reduced my signal level because I'm compressing and I'm going to bring it back up to a nominal level and then on down the chain. But if you don't know what you're doing, you got that thing cranked, and you got it slammed and you're cranking it, and then all of a sudden, you might be getting to your fader at 0, but you're clipping the input to your compressor, or you're clipping the output to the input to your EQ or your output to your EQ because you're like, jacking things way up, right? So as we talked earlier about gain structure, the same reason that we adjust that level and that signal now is going through the preamp section, it's going to go through the EQ section, it's going to go through the dynamic section, it's going to go all the way down this chains, as you can see here, and you're going to see levels reacting, and eventually your hope is that when you get down to the fader, you're still at the nominal level, and then you bring it up and you got a great signal. But just be aware that you can do a lot of damage level wise, and so your final meter could be showing you a great level, but you're clipping somewhere and your signal's really getting degraded at that point. So be aware of that.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. I think we're gonna look at some Q&A here, and think for the most part, everything's been answered except for this last one. And so the question is from John. Thank you, John. Is the insert usually or always after the EQ on an analog or a more basic digital mixer? And the question is, it depends on the manufacturer and the design. You might even have the same manufacturer, but different mixers may even be different. Let me bring up the screen I had before, to where basically what you're going to have to do is go to that beloved block diagram that nobody wants to talk about, right? And so where's the one? Here we go. And so if we look at this block diagram again, for this particular mixer, the insert is after the compressor and the EQ. And so again, the best way to know what your mixer can do for these types of questions is to look at the block diagram. Some of the older, more expensive consoles, live consoles, the big ones that took 4 people to lift, there were actually ways where you could change that through jumpers, right? Remember, you used to you'd have to open it up and switch a jumper to change the signal path. And so those are on your vintage.
My little AMEC here actually has 2 insert sends on the back, a pre and post fade.
Ooh.
That I could pick from.
But is that more of a recording style?
It's a broadcast mixer, but yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty esoteric for our, but it was just funny that, oh wow, I could totally pick.
Right. Well, all right. That music means that it's time to wrap it up. I have to be the director and everything. Again, go to the poll, to the Q&A, and click on the link, fill it out, let us know what you want to hear. I want to thank again Ron and Harold for joining me. Now, next week, we're going to talk dynamics. We're going to have some fun. We're going to open up the Pandora's box of toys, and we're going to talk about all the virtual stuff you can find in digital mixers. If everything goes right, we'll have some audio examples. And Ron and Harold, I don't know how I'm going to do that for you guys. Technology. But anyways, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate. I think that's all the questions. Yes. Yeah, that was it. All right, and we will see you guys next Friday, and you'll see another invite. This one will actually have a registration, which will be kind of like you'll fill it out, and then you'll get the link. And there will also be a calendar to utilize for the if you want a reminder to log into your calendar. So again, thank you, Ron Cook, Harold Rubens, and until next week, we will see you guys. Be safe, be well, and enjoy. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.